Recording. Sweet. All right, here we go. All right, welcome everybody back to another episode of Iota Talk. This self has something to say, and we're back with another episode. Today we're talking about civic engagement, and we're here to explain to the brothers of the Southern region about the history of Iota Phi Theta when we're talking about civic engagement and what does that mean to us? Like, how do we become more civic engaged? And I'm so excited today to have a great guest with my boy, my partner in crime, Donald Broussard. Sir, how you doing today?
Blessed as always, man. I'm so happy to be here. I'm happy and excited about this particular one. This is a real one. This one right here is means a lot to us as Iota men because we have a brother of ours who is going to spit some knowledge, some game to all of you and everyone who is watching at home. So I'm looking forward to it. It's going to be a great episode.
Absolutely, absolutely. So today we have Brother Keenan Saulter with us, brother. Thank you for coming on. Thank you for coming on. Please introduce yourself to the people. Let them know who you are, your background. We'd love to hear more from you.
Sure. Thank you, brothers, for having me on. Honored to be a guest of the Southern region. There's a big connection between the Southern region and the Midwest region. Kind of historically, a lot of the instrumental brothers who've been around in the Southern region for a while are brothers from the Midwest. I was talking to Dominique a little bit earlier and Donald about Brother Crystal Banner, who I think chartered you all's chapter, is a Midwest brother, and a lot of good brothers down there. So my name is Keenan Saulter. Been a member of the fraternity since spring of 1994, which Brother Dominique told me before he came on is about 2 years after he was born. I'm coming up on 30 this year, but it's been one of the greatest decisions I've ever made to join this amazing fraternity. In my day job, I'm a practicing attorney. I've been practicing law for 24 years. This is my 24th year. I graduated from Howard Law School with honors, Washington, D.C., and then my undergrad I did at Illinois State University, and that's where I became a member of Iota Phi Theta. I'm currently a member of Eta Omega Alumni Chapter here in Chicago, Illinois, and I also have the honor of sitting on the International Board of Directors, and I serve as the vice chair of the board.
Awesome, awesome. So we have a man of a lot of power, a lot of influence, but more important, a lot of knowledge. So definitely want to kick this off with I think a pivotal question that how will lead us going forward. And so, brother Keenan, I have to ask, can you talk about, can you guide us through some of the early history of Iota Phi Theta fraternity's involvement in civic engagement, and how has it evolved from your perspective over the years?
Sure. I think a lot of the viewers will know about the historical context of the fraternity being founded in the height of the civil rights era, um, and how volatile those times were. I think the reason why that's still relevant to us today, as we just crossed over the threshold of 60 years last year, is I believe, certainly in my experience, and a lot of the brothers who either brought me in or I've had the pleasure of bringing in or influencing, I think that DNA of civil rights still flows through. The issues evolve. I won't say they change because some of them are the same thing. So I mentioned I became a member in 1994. In 1995, myself and a majority of my chapter from Illinois State University went out to the Million Man March in DC. And I can tell you there were brothers there from everywhere. And we know that that was something where, if you remember, well, you won't remember it as when you're 3 years old, Dominique. But I will tell you historically, one of the things that happened around that was one, there was all this talk about there was going to be violence and issues with all these black men coming to DC. And really the opposite happened. It was nothing but a peaceful gathering. And I bring that up because, you know, some of the things that happened to us in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s and the 90s, they still happen today. They just have a slightly different context. And so when you look at one of the issues I'm very passionate about, I get to work on it in my day job as a civil rights attorney, is police violence against people of color, primarily African Americans and or Latinos. But in the African American context, that's something that's very critical and pivotal. When you look at the history of law enforcement, for example, that goes all the way back. You trace back the actual position of county sheriff or local sheriff to uh, slave patrols, right? That's where the history
Right.
of law enforcement comes from in this country. And so I bring that up because we still see to this very day the extrajudicial killing and maiming of people, primarily of color. You look at the numbers of people who are shot and or killed by police, it far outnumbers the numbers in the overall population. And so when you talk about civic engagement, I think people tend to focus on national elections, right? I think local issues matter a lot more. And I think Iota, when you look at our history, even through this current day, a lot of brothers are involved on the ground level, in their communities, addressing local issues. I'm not saying national politics are important, but I think, have done a pretty good job of addressing local issues. And I think local issues tend to impact us sometimes even more than national things. You know, you look at some of the cultural wars going on now. Look at our local school boards. You look at police boards in Chicago, what's called a police board that addresses discipline against police officers. Those things are critically important. We have some members throughout the country who have gotten involved on the city council level, school board level. And I think Iota, just because of that DNA and what attracts a lot of brothers to Iota, we maintain that presence in the civil rights presence. And I think that is obviously goes hand in hand with civic engagement.
Absolutely. I would
Hey,
ask you
I don't know what
this.
you was. I learned a lot.
I would ask you this. In your viewpoint as a civil rights attorney, what does civil engagement specifically mean to you? Why is it important today, right now in our society, and the need for it?
Sure. So to me, civic engagement means having a real finger on the pulse of what's going on around you that impacts you, your family, and people who are similarly situated to you. So that's why I brought up local issues. You know, you shouldn't be totally divorced or not understand what's going on with you can live in a small community, a rural community, a suburb, or you can live in a large city. You should know who your local representatives are on your city council or your county board, and you should be engaged in ballot initiatives. They're ballot initiatives that could literally affect your bottom line, right? The things that you can vote on, things that you should educate yourself about. So, Brother Dominique was talking a little bit earlier, preparation for this. We often a lot of people focus on getting out to vote, and that's important. But what some people don't do is educate themselves about what they're voting about. And so they don't take the time. And that's what I think civic engagement comes from. I think that you asked me how to define it. Civic engagement is certainly knowing not only that you should vote, but understanding who you should be voting for as it relates to your own interest, and then also what initiatives will impact you. So I think civic engagement is at its core is about educating yourself and then being an agent of change, trying to educate other people. If there's a ballot initiative that you hear about that you think is impactful to other people who are like you, or that you just want to be an advocate for, get involved, get engaged, and learn about it first, and then educate about it second. So it's a wide ranging thing because there's so many levels you can get involved on. But I think again, I will definitely harp on the local issues really matter a great deal.
And from a local perspective, though, how do we get brothers more involved in that? So again, not just from activating the vote by participating in it, but leveraging their own power by maybe being on the ballot, or maybe being the person out there informing individuals of what these candidates stand for. So how do we get more brothers involved in those aspects of that local level politics?
That's a great question. I think in your city, if I'm not mistaken, there was a brother running for city council a while back, John Branch. Brother Branch is in Houston. Yeah, so I know a lot of guys in you all's area. And so I think getting on the ballot is not a bad idea, and you can start small. There are tons of and I'm going to kind of speak on Illinois. I know more about that than in Texas, but I'm sure these things exist in Texas also. There are library boards, there are school boards, there's local councils. So it doesn't, I don't think you have to jump out there and say, I'm going to run for state senate or state representative or some state constitutional office, but there's local stuff. It could be unpaid appointed positions, but getting engaged. And honestly, you can start by just going to your city council meeting or watching it online, being engaged there. So many decisions happen with your tax dollars that people unfortunately don't pay attention to unless something happens, unless something is like, oh, now we need to get engaged and get active about this. So I think really getting educated on things that impact you in your local area, and how you can get directly involved. And sometimes it may just be about going and saying, I'm going to meet my alderman, I'm going to meet the mayor in my suburb, because politicians, they pay attention to the folks who engage them. And they know if you're engaged, that means that you're somebody who's going to pay attention when election time comes. That means you're going to pay attention when they need to pass a budget. And so the best way, I think, to start getting engaged is really to educate yourself, show up at some of these community organizations, be it, like I said, a police board or oversight committee, county board, and you'd be surprised at how far you can get just by starting there and starting to meet people. And people will recognize you when they see a young African American male or female, and outside of areas that are predominantly African American, when they see you in a crowd at one of these meetings, they're going to recognize you. Walk up to them, introduce themselves. Remember, they're public servants, right? So they it's not the same as walking up to a random stranger. Your tax dollars are paying their salary. Even if they're appointed, they're still there to serve you as a member of the public. That is a great way, I believe, to kind of get engaged and then also engage others, because then you can become a source of education. You go back to your chapter meeting, go back to your church, go back to your lodge and say, hey, I learned about in Houston, we've got this local ballot initiative coming up in 2025 where they want to shift some tax dollars away from education or DEI or whatever and put it toward this. We should galvanize against that.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Yeah, I appreciate that concept, and I was about to ask the same question that Brother Montgomery just asked. Also, I want to take a little bit further overall in regards of our younger people, younger society. I'm not going to age myself, but I'm an '80s kid. I'm an '80s baby, so I kind of know a little bit, especially what happened in the '80s and a lot of turmoil that happened in that particular time frame, especially under the Ronald Reagan regime, going after specifically Black folk. Now I know it was much more concentrated in the Baltimore, in the basically the DMV area, mainly because Reagan was there for obvious reasons. But in regards of our kids today, our young kids now, who are in college and going to be going into the quote unquote workforce, many of them are go towards certain music, certain individuals that I guess old fogies like myself in the 40s wouldn't necessarily say, hey, that's a good example, right? A perfect example is Sexy Red. A couple months ago, she talked about how she wants, you know, Trump and so on and so forth because he gave a check, but don't really know the background in regards to the Democrats voted that to happen. How can we, as a Black community, get our younger folks to be more engaged locally and then have an opportunity to venture out to understand on a national level and get them truly involved, similar to our heroes in the 60s and the 70s, even the 50s before that?
That's a great and difficult question. I think if you look at the 60s, ironically, the struggle kind of always existed in kind of even in the civil rights era. A lot of people, you take Dr. King, for example. There were a lot of older civil rights leaders who felt like he was too young and not established enough to be leading out in the movement. They ultimately ended up choosing him to lead the Montgomery bus boycott, primarily, I believe, because of his pastorate at the church in Montgomery. And so I think that's probably was the biggest reason. But you had a lot of older civil rights leaders who were like, wait a minute, where's this guy coming from? You look at back then, the youth committees, the younger folks were a lot of the folks who were advocating, and their parents, let's say I'm in my late 40s now, late 40s or 50s, 60s were kind of probably more status quo. Things have changed now, I think, because the issues aren't exactly the same. It doesn't feel as prescient because nobody's telling you to get to the back of the bus. Nobody's telling you can't drink out of a certain water fountain or you can't send your children to school here or there. And so we've lost, I think, some of the urgency of civic engagement and some of the urgency of civil rights. I think, quite honestly, the best way to engage younger folks is to get younger folks. And what I mean when I say that is identify, like it's identify someone who's in their early 20s, who is active, who is engaged, and who I think younger people are more likely to listen to that person, quite frankly. Not saying we should not talk to them, but there's going to be a certain generational gap for some people. They'll say, well, why should I listen to this guy in his 40s or this lady in her 50s? They don't understand what it's like out here. They, whatever. There's a lot of intergenerational strife too. I notice a lot of people. I don't know what generation these people are at this point. I don't know if it's Gen Z or what they're in. What do you consider, Dominique?
I'm millennial, last I checked.
Okay, so Gen Z is after you, right?
Yes.
Okay, so I see a lot of millennials and older Gen Zers talking about kind of the ways that not necessarily my generation, but the generation a little bit before me and the back end of my generation have kind of had things differently or made things more challenging for them. They talk about how much more expensive education is than it was for us, or how much more housing cost than it did for us. And so they actually look at our generations as somewhat antagonistically. And so I think, that's always existed though, and across cultures. It's always kind of this, middle age versus the youth, and each of them kind of talking at each other. And so I think that to really drill down on your question, Brother Broussard, is identifying younger folks. And one of the ways to do that, quite frankly, is to go to college campuses, right? Because on college campuses, you got some young folks who are there just to party, have a good time. But you've also got folks on college campuses who are engaged, who are going to be engaged in political action committees, who have college chapters, who are engaged in college politics. And that really can be the spark a lot of times to get somebody engaged. There may be an issue on campus they care a lot more about, to say, hey, let's transfer that and get engaged in our local college community or back home when we go home or whatever. And so I think with anything in life, you got to find a way to speak that person's language. And sometimes it is finding somebody who is closer to their demographic. You don't have celebrities, sports, or music. You brought up Sexy Red, who I think, you've seen a decent amount of celebrities, more on the entertainment side than the sports side, who you brought up Trump. And I don't think this is necessarily political, but certainly I think it's not a controversial statement to say that Donald Trump generally does not support many of the things that I think would advance African Americans. But they're entertainers who, because he pardoned a certain rapper, or because, quite honestly, a lot of the things they say, I'm just like, that's just ignorant. It just doesn't make any sense to me. It's a lack of, and when I say ignorant, I'm not being rude. I'm literally saying, like, you don't understand the implication of these issues on your cousins, your brothers who aren't millionaires, your mom, your grandmother, and access to healthcare, access to education for your nieces and nephews. They don't get it. And it might be because they're financially well off. They're like, well, his financial policies are better for me. But I really think it's just a lack of actual knowledge and education about how detrimental some of the things are to people that look like them.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are living in silos, right, on an everyday basis. Because we have phones, we have access to so much technology that has so much information that you can pull firsthand. But a lot of people, their understanding of the world is on an individual level. So they're not seeing anything from that micro or macro perspective. To your point, like, yeah, I pardon Lil Wayne, so maybe Lil Wayne votes for him. And I like Lil Wayne, so I'm gonna do what Lil Wayne does. But he's also a multi-millionaire. His benefit of his reason for voting for Trump may be purely business related. He might get those tax breaks. He's a businessman and he's owner. So that might be his motivation for voting for Trump. By the way, to any brothers Republican to vote for Trump, that's your right to do so. If you have value in it, as someone once told me, as Black men and women, we vote for who gives us the best chance of survival. So in that perspective, maybe that's what is happening for you. But I think a lot of people aren't taking advantage of like the access to resources that is prevalent in their lives. Like, again, a cell phone, a library with a computer, just internet access in general. That you can learn so much. You can read books and have a better understanding of the world in your local area on national, political, national, local, state levels. But a lot of people don't take advantage of it. I learned that firsthand, like working with kids here in the local community, that they're really focused on their own battles of survival. So again, maybe that speaks to the issue right here. Like where we are as a race, as really as individuals, like communities, we're fighting so many things at one time. We have to pick and choose what do we want to give our energy to. I rather focus on getting through this day, getting through work, making sure my kids are fed,
Right.
versus pay attention to what's going on in the local community, politically, or on the state level, or on a national level. That takes too much time. And they're right. Like, it takes a lot of time. I'm up to 2 in the morning reading stuff, right? So
Right.
I get that, but I think it's very, very important for people to take advantage of these resources for their gain. Like, how do they do that? How do we as fraternity members? I ask you, brother Keenan, in this vastly different and growing political space, right? How do we navigate these differences in the ideology while also being encouraging to our brothers, encouraging to our community members when we're talking about leveraging and participating in your civic duties?
So you hit on a couple of things. I'm going to answer the question and circling back some of the stuff you said. So it's interesting. There's a phrase in the Bible that says, as generations go on and as time passes on, people get weaker and wiser. And so I say that because of this. You reference how much information we have. Access to information is important. Full stop. However, we know now, for example, during the 2016 campaign for the presidency, that there are Russian forces who purposely targeted people with misinformation campaigns. So you're right. We all have access to so much with the phone, right? But sometimes I think what's important is still having conversations. Like, this is important, right? Being able to sit with Donald and Dominique and sit and talk in more depth. We could be sitting around playing cards. We could be sitting around watching the game, doing the commercials. We could be sitting, having a drink together or having a meal together and really drilling down on the issues. The clickbait between the purposeful misinformation out there. And then the other thing is counterculture. One would argue it's always been attractive to younger people, right? Like I kind of talked about earlier, kind of the generational battle. But I think now it is becoming vogue on some level. Like, I look around social media and I'm like, I see some people, famous and not so famous, talking about supporting positions that are literally against their own self-interest. Like, for example, we've kind of and I don't think there's any reason why we can't talk about politics. We've kind of glazed over political positions. In today's climate, if you look at the numbers, the Democratic Party enjoys a wide level of support from African Americans. We all know that. And I think there's some solid reasons as to why that is. If you go back historically, back into, like, say, the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, even early 80s, it wasn't as profound. The Republican Party kind of took a turn around Richard Nixon and turned into racism, quite frankly. Ronald Reagan announced his campaign in Mississippi, where Philadelphia, Mississippi. That's not a mistake. He's from California. That's not a mistake that he announced his campaign in Philadelphia, Mississippi. That's a dog whistle. And so I think identifying, somebody, like, I see a lot of people talking about Trump, and like a lot of it, I think, is because it has become in vogue to, well, why should I support the Democrats? What have they done for us? Why we're still in a bad position? It was in vogue during President Obama's presidency. Well, what did President Obama do for Black people? Well, okay, before his presidency, look at the highest percentage of people who did not have access to health care or health insurance. Poor and minorities, right? And there's, unfortunately, when you kind of do those two Venn diagrams, those circles often overlap. And so when you look at even President Biden, what he's done with HBCUs, like, there are issues that really matter. And I think some of this is going back to kind of your earlier questions. You get into our community. Well, do you support Texas Southern University? Do you support North Carolina A&T University? Do you support Howard University? Yes. Well, let me tell you who also supports those. And let me tell you how they supported them, how they funded them compared to their counterparts. And so really, but see, that requires you, as being a change agent, to actually educate yourself and not just kind of have that first layer of talking points. You got to actually dig a little bit deeper and say, hey, look, this is why this is important. This is why this state attorney or district attorney's race is important, because this particular district attorney or this particular party has fought against bail reform, well, yeah, I know you've never been arrested. You don't plan on committing any crime. But what about your cousin who got arrested for petty theft and can't get out because they can't afford a relatively modest bond? Who does that impact? That disproportionately impacts people of color and poor people. So those issues, you may not think they matter to you, but they certainly probably matter to somebody who's in your life or matter to someone who's close to you. And we have to educate and arm ourselves with enough information to be able to kind of go back and say, look at it from this perspective. Think about it like this, and be willing to engage in real conversation. Like there's nuance, right? It's not just looking at a tweet and and kind of basing an opinion off that. Or I don't know what you call it anymore because he changed it to X, but you know what I'm talking about.
I don't do any of that. I don't twit or tweet or gram or any of that stuff. I'm too old for that right now. But I feel what
I'm
you're
older than
saying.
you. I'm on a lot of social media platforms, so I'm older than you. I think. Go ahead.
I can't do, for some reason, I just can't do Instagram. It just or Twitter. It just bothers me a little bit. I know eventually I will, because I have my nonprofit and I have to do it, but it's gonna be doing. I've been doing it for begrudgingly. I was feeling what you were saying specifically about um what has Trump or Biden done for Black folk and so on and so forth. And I had a great conversation with a couple people from my university. I graduated from Alabama A&M University.
Mm-hmm.
I the greatest HBCU in the land. That's just me. And and we were talking about how much Alabama, specifically Alabama, funneled money without my school knowing about it. Like we are owed $12+ million
Mm-hmm.
that they funneled away from us. And our former presidents, prior to the one we have always asked about that. It seems like it's short. What's going on? We wanted transparency, never got transparency, of course. And it brings, and what you were saying brings me to my next point in regards to strategies. And what are some specific strategies for one, getting more of our youth? I know you talked about going to colleges, but getting more of our youth and young people after college, or after the 2-year college or 4-year university, or after they finish their trade, to become more aware as to what's happening in society through the world, through the lens of civic engagement. Like the situations you talk about the money that our HBCUs are not getting, the perspective of many of these laws that are being um, written by local lawmakers. Louisiana is a perfect example. Literally just getting our governor, extreme right wing, and nothing wrong with Republicans, but for him to go so extreme that it's going to be, now it's going to be easier to charge young kids, disproportionately Black folk, of course, young kids as adults,
Mm-hmm.
and trying them as adults and punishing them as so. Having a 13 or 14-year-old kid going to Angola is nothing nice, right? So, especially if you know anything about Angola, um, one of the worst prisons in the United States overall. So, what are some strategies to get those individuals that just passed the college, just passed the university, just passed the trade area, to to be more civically engaged, and and then on top of that, how do you think it would look if we get them engaged civically?
So I think in any conversation about how do you get someone engaged, you have to find a way to meet them where they are. And I think the best way to do that, if you're talking about somebody, so the age range of folks you're talking about, let's say they're 23, 24, 22 years old. If you start talking to them about access to healthcare for senior citizens, they probably have a grandmother or grandfather. But ultimately, when you're that age and you're talking about being a senior citizen, which is like 40 years from that point or 45 years from that point, that's not really part of your day-to-day thought process, not front of mind. So I think if you're a change agent, which I think you guys are, what you have to do is you have to identify the issue or set of issues or even a candidate, but really it's about the issues. And I think you identify the candidates based on the issues that does impact them. And then I think sometimes the conversation can start by shooting them an article, not one that's 8 pages long. Just say, hey, did you know about this? Shoot them a text, shoot them a link to it. Did you? And then like, hey, when we get together, let's talk about this. I want to pick your brain about what you think about it. And then the other thing is, and I think a lot of people my age fall victim and fall prey to this, and this is how you lose people, is don't talk about, and I think this is why a lot of young folks feel disillusioned. Don't talk over their heads as it relates to kind of they don't know anything. They haven't seen what you've seen. They don't get it yet. Just keep living, that kind of stuff. Well, no, if they're 18, they have the same right to vote that you do. They're 25, they can be a member of the House of Representatives, right? They're 30, they can be a United States Senator. And so identify what is that small or large issue, local or national, but most likely local. You'd be like, okay, this is a hook for this person because they may not have known that this issue could directly impact them and their interest. And so identify those things. And like I said, shoot them a link to a quick article, bring up the conversation, and then kind of like follow up with it. And there are a lot of different strategies, obviously, right? But I think that's a good one, is to identify something that you think you can relate to that person on, and then get them there. And then also, if you know their interest, identify community-based things or civic-related things. That it could be an event, it could be a podcast, it could be something they can attend via Zoom, it could be something at a local library. Like, hey, let's go to this. Let's go grab lunch, and then let's go to this thing over at blank, blank, blank. I think those are the things. And a lot of the stuff, so now it's election season here in Illinois. Our primary is next Tuesday. And a lot of this stuff, man, happens on a very, very, very micro level. There's a guy who I went to law school with, I go to church with him as well. He's running for state attorney here in Cook County, which is the county that encompasses Chicago. And a lot of the campaigning is literally done door to door in people's living rooms, sitting down, talking to people. And that's how you still connect. No matter what the devices are, you still have to connect with people. Like, now, it could be also send a text. I had a friend posted on Facebook, like, who should I vote for in this race? I was like, well, let me jump right in there and tell you. I've known this guy since law school. Like, this is what I know about him. This is why I think he's a good candidate. So don't underestimate your sphere of influence either with stuff like that. But being willing to engage folks where they are and kind of catching them where they are, I think is really, really important.
I appreciate that response. I'm kind of curious, and hopefully, you can't shed light on this. I understand. So we started off talking about the history of Iota. We're talking about civic engagement, and we're kind of going into what's going on socially around us and ways to be involved in it on an individual level. And you can even make the argument for chapters as well. But when we speak about Iota nationally, maybe you could shed some light on, like, as an org, what are we doing right now to be civically engaged in our communities? I think a lot of brothers feel a little disconnect from that knowledge. And I would love to help them better understand what we're doing right now and how they can be involved as well.
It's ironic that you'd ask that question today. So today we had, including our international Grand Polaris, we had brothers on Capitol Hill as part of what they call fraternity days on Capitol Hill for the APHC. And so within the last 18 months, the fraternity has a political action committee called the Brown and Gold PAC. I'm a member of it. Brother Walter Fields is the chairman of it. And so the fraternity is engaged nationally. There are some rules on what a 501c3 organization like ours can do and cannot do politically. So that's why we have a separate PAC. So, like, we can't come out and endorse candidates, for example, right? So you can have your tax status impacting. So I mean, like, nationally, like us talking here as individuals, even individual brothers, like, I can be like, hey, you should go vote for John Smith. But from a national perspective, we can't do that. But what we can do, and I think we actually have probably done a decent job of, is engaging brothers on issues that matter to us. And I think I'm excited about the PAC because it's something new for us. And so that's something that is happening right now. There are also various states often have kind of the state version of what they just attended on the national level. So state of Texas probably has this. State of Illinois has days where you can basically do a legislative action day at your local legislature, where you can say, maybe it might be NPHC, or maybe you might just say, hey, we're going to get the chapters in Dallas and the chapters in Houston. We're going to identify a member of the Texas State Legislature, and we're going to ask that person, the Black Caucus, we want to come down and visit with you on a day, learn more about your work, learn more about issues that impact our community and how we can be more engaged. And that's something that as alumni chapters, we can do that and should be doing that. And I know in Virginia last year, the chapters attended a similar event before on the state level. And so that's something that chapters locally can do. But also, like I mentioned, we just last week, ironically, there was a brother in a local police force. He was now. It's a racially mixed suburb of Chicago, but the village management is primarily white. Excuse me. And this brother of ours was the police chief for a little less than a year, and he was targeted, quite frankly, by the village administration. So last Monday, there was a village board meeting. And there was a call to action. So there were all these other suburban police chiefs that were coming to support this brother. And then there were brothers of the fraternity who also went and showed up. And that's a good example of like direct action. It has made kind of local news here that this meeting occurred, and there was kind of some pushbacks and protests. But that's a very micro issue, right? Going and supporting this African-American police chief who happens to be a member of Iota Phi Theta Fraternity and saying, we as members of the community and as people of color, and it's powerful when you've got a village board meeting that typically doesn't have 7-10 people, when you got a packed standing room only room, and you got, for us individually, brothers in there who are members of an NPC organization in their paraphernalia, in their colors, supporting him. That's powerful. And that's the kind of thing I think younger folks are actually more likely to get involved with. Direct action, protest over. When you look at what the protests that swept the country on the heels of the murder of George Floyd, young people were leading out there. Not saying that there weren't people in their 40s and 50s and 60s out there protesting. They were, but young folks were leading out there. So I think when you find the issue, they will engage probably a bit more than they get credit for.
I agree. Yeah, I agree with that. My next question really deals a bit with the concept of diversity and inclusion in regards of, in what ways does diversity and inclusion play a role specifically in civic engagement? And how can we ensure that all voices are heard and valued? Because we're all part of the National Panhellenic Council, and there are white members and Hispanic members that are part specifically of our fraternity, of our great fraternity, and even others in particular also. So how can we ensure that all our voices are heard specifically in the realm of civic engagement overall and valued, of course?
I think we have to be noisy. I think we have to let those elected officials know, those appointed officials know that we're here, and it can't just be a once every 18 months. Like if there's an issue, and I don't care what area you live in, there's a local issue that probably impacts you and probably disproportionately impacts you as an African American or a person of color or a woman in ways that don't impact white males or white people in general. And these are just political facts, I think. You've got to let them know that you're there, right? And that's why I continue to go back. And I think you all seem to be focusing as well. National stuff is absolutely important, but you're going to make a much bigger impact locally, because if you say, brothers, we're going to start going to the police board meetings, they're once a month, and we're going to get 10 guys to go to the police board meetings, and we're going to wear our fraternity blazers, we're going to wear our fraternity cardigans, or even we're going to wear pins, but we're going to be there and we're going to sit together and they're going to know we're there. If you do that 3 months in a row, you're going to get recognized. Your local school board, same thing. You mentioned DEI or diversity, equity, inclusion. Quite frankly, it's under attack. I think you guys know that, right? It's really under attack throughout the South, but it's not only under attack. There are schools, throughout the North, like everywhere. When I say schools, I mean colleges and universities, where DEI is literally just being defunded and taken out of budgets, just completely out of budgets. There's already been an attack in the arena of the court system. So there's been a lot of court cases that have eroded diversity initiatives for, like, say, colleges and universities, right? There was a recent one in the last year. And so a lot of schools have basically taken diversity, as we historically thought about it, out of their admissions consideration. They have not taken, for example, legacy admission policies out. And so, again, those things, if you talk about a legacy, unless it's an HBCU, that's going to disproportionately impact us. Because for many of these schools, we've only been able to attend these schools for, since the 1920s, early 1900s. And so we have to identify, and one person, one group of people can't do it all. But I think sitting down and having these kind of conversations and then saying, okay, what are the 3 issues we want to engage in Houston over the next year? What are the 3 bodies we want to make sure we attend their meetings? Who are the politicians we want to make sure we talk to? And really just identify, listen, and understand so you're not going to be able to do it all. You're not going to get to everything, but you can make an impact. And the other thing you can do, like business or anything else, is the networking aspect of it. You may start going to police board meetings, and you may identify a member of the police board who is connected to a state representative or state senator. And they may say, hey, you guys talk to this person about this issue too, because it's interconnected. There's an issue coming up in front of the state legislature that will actually impact your local police department. You should talk to them. And so if you got folks who are willing to do the work and kind of find their level of engagement, I think you certainly, we can have an impact. And we are having an impact. I think the questions that you all are asking, and I think they're very important, is how do we kind of have a focused impact kind of across the board?
Yeah, especially this thing like the historical relevance of civil rights and so being socially engaged in the South, having a strategy, having a plan, coordinated efforts. Seeing again, we brought up MLK earlier in discussion is really important to our future, right? So it's something you brought up earlier as well, as the issues are different, right? So we're not being forced to go back a bus, but now certain rights are being attacked, the pro-life or not abortion or affirmative action or things like that, who are a variation of what was oppression in the 60s, 70s, 40s, whatever. We're taking hold now, we're taking the new formation nowadays. That's why I love to have these conversations. And so I'm so happy you came on and kind of shed a lot of light on that. I think you give a lot of brothers a lot of insight, not just again to the historical relevance of Iota within being socially engaged, being civilly engaged, but also ways that they can go about it on a local level, right? And so one thing that we're putting together for our region members is that a toolkit because we are part of the PAC in the Southern region, so that they can be socially engaged at the individual level, at the chapter level, and have ways and pull resources so they can map that out how they want to go about it for their own individual state city needs.
Yeah.
So I definitely commend you for your efforts that you're working on. Everything you do for Iota, being what I'm assuming is a life member of Iota at this point.
I
But
am.
also, thank you so much for coming on the show. But I want to leave some room for any remarks that you may have or any thoughts you want to share with some of the Southern Region brothers before we end today's episode.
I think we've covered a lot here. I think just encourage all of us to have those conversations. That's where it starts. That's where it's always going to start. And you'd be surprised at the perspective you can bring to somebody that they've just never even thought about, or just, you said this earlier, Dominique, and it's the same for all of us. I don't care if you're 22 and your thoughts are, I've got student loans to pay off. I just got to the entry level position. I want to advance my career. I'm 48 and I just sent my oldest daughter to college. It's so easy to get caught up in day-to-day life and then to be reactionary. And so that's why I think just having the conversations, having, kind of those small sparks, and then identifying something small that you can bite off, as opposed to saying, we're going to just go out here and immediately change the world in 2 months. Identify that small thing, like, hey, can you commit? And it may be that you get 10 guys to that first meeting and only 6 to the next one. That's okay. Keep plugging along, right? The presence of being there is important. And so having those conversations and letting folks know that these issues are important. And let's get together and do something together. I think those things, and I think just starting this podcast, I know it's relatively new for you guys, but this is a great way of just sparking conversation, give us someone something to think about. They can listen to this in the car, at the gym, whatever, and just be like, okay, yeah, this makes a lot of sense. And so I think you guys are doing the right things, and I just encourage all of us leaning into what is in Iota's DNA as it relates to civic involvement, just identifying the issues and getting involved.
Appreciate that. Appreciate that. Again, thank you so much for coming on the show. This has been a phenomenal conversation. So you guys, all those listening, man, hope you guys got something out of it today. Hopefully these conversations are impactful for you, able to pull some information out, get some inside perspective. But in the day, it's all about I-Phi, and we're here to continue to promote not our fraternity for membership, but also our engagement in our cities and in our communities, because that's what we're here for. We are the Brothers of Brown and Gold. We continue to do, keep digging and doing better in everything we do. So again, brother, thank you. My co-host, Brother Bouchard, thank you as well, sir. I appreciate you. So with that, we're going to wrap it up. You guys be good. Peace.
All right, thank you, brothers, for having me. I appreciate it.